Good day, and today we're going to talk about the characters from Canterbury Tales. Now, if you want me to go through the actual content or put into context the different stories of the Canterbury Tales, leave a comment down below. Let me know if there's certain parts of the story you'd like to hear, if you'd like me to go through all of it. But for today, we're going to concentrate specifically on characterization from the Canterbury Tales. Let's start with the knight that we see at the beginning. He's very distinguished. He follows this sense or path of chivalry. He immediately is set up to be this quote-unquote truthful, honorable, good guy type. Now, of course, because he is a knight, he has ridden into battle, and because he has done well in battle, he is being honored for his graces. Because he's supposed to be our good guy, he's very modest, he's not boorish, he's not going to be the type of character who tells you that he is the greatest knight of all. So therefore, he's going to be this perfect character. He would be what's considered a true perfect knight. He would also be a good example from the nobility. He's going to represent all that is good about knighthood and the nobility. This particular character in the Canterbury Tales would not be satirized. This is one that you can take as truth. Our next character we'll talk about is his squire. So he has curly locks and he sings and he dances. He writes poetry. He is this lover type, the type who's going to be giving us a bit of a sense of romance when it comes to reading the Canterbury Tales. Now, he's a different character than the knight. He also fought in battles, but he fought in nearby battles so he could get home to see the ladies. He tells us that he can both joust and dance, so he's a little bit offset of the knight. He's opposite, where he also fights battles. He also wants people to know that he has been fighting battles. He wants to boast of what he's done. One of the quotes we have about the squire is, "He loved so hotly that till dawn grew pale, he slept as little as a nightingale." That kind of tells you what is most important in the squire's life, that he would stay up all night long so he can love. Now, the squire was courteous and serviceable when his father was around, but this is a satirization. This one we don't want to take as something genuine. He's very insincere. Our next character for the Canterbury Tales we'll look at is the Yeoman. Now, the Yeoman wore a coat and a hood of green. That's going to tell us what type of a character he would be. Back in the days of the Canterbury Tales, he's going to have a certain type of standing in the community, and so his coat and hood of green tells you he's a yeoman. He is a free man, but he serves the knights. Now, he knows his business as an archer, and he does it well. His feathers are perfectly made in the arrows, and so he's a very good yeoman. He also shows proper religious respect from the time period by wearing his St. Christopher medal. A St. Christopher medal is supposed to be a protector of travelers, and since the yeoman is traveling along to battles with the knights, he is showing proper religious respect. He's also a proper forester, and so he's the type of character who can hunt. He's the type of character who can go into battle and serve the knights. This is not a satirized character. This is another character that you can take as truth, as sincerity. He's a good example of what the middle class would have been considered back in those days. Our next example of a character from the Canterbury Tales is the Prioress. Now, that would be a more archaic term for a nun. Now, this particular prioress is coy. She's very flirtatious. She is falsely modest. So it seems to be an opposite of what we would expect a nun to be. Now, we have a common heroine for romance novels for the Middle Ages, and that is going to be somebody called a Madame Eglantine. So she tries to exude grace, manners, and sophistication, but she spoke a very poor quality of French. And at the time of the Canterbury Tales, if you were going to show how sophisticated you were, even if you weren't French, if you're going to be a royal, if you're going to be upper middle class, you should be able to speak French well. You should exude grace and manners like a proper lady or a gentleman. And it seems like she's attempting to do so, but she does it with very poor quality. What is also not proper for her is that she owns hunting dogs, and yet was overly upset when a mouse died in her story. And then she also feeds the dogs roasted flesh and fine food, while the people around her were starving. Again, this seems to be like nothing that we would consider a prioress or a nun to be acting or behaving as. For her, she has glass gray eyes, which for the Canterbury Tales would be quite deceptive. They're not a specific color. Her forehead was fair of spread, but they talk about a span from brow to brow, so she's quite a large woman. Now, her cloak has a graceful charm, another reference to having large features, and she wears jewelry with Amor vincet omnia on it, which is Latin for love conquers all. But for this particular prioress, it might mean romantic love and not God's love. Again, as we're looking at the nun or the prioress, this is a very satirized character. This is not one you should take as truth. The next character we can see as well, along with the nun, is the monk. And again, when we think of religion in the Canterbury Tales, once again, we're going to see a satirized or not quite wholesome character. Now, our monk is riding a horse, which he is not supposed to do. Monks are supposed to take vows of chastity, vows of poverty. If he's impoverished, he should not have a horse. He ignores the rules of his order. He believes that he himself is progressive, but he's supposed to be withholding those vows of charity, the vows of poverty. He also seems to be quite lazy. He owns dogs, which he was not supposed to do, and he wears expensive clothing. He has fur on his sleeves. And again, he's supposed to be poor. He's also supposed to be taking that view of, being poor with his vows. He's actually quite fat. Now, he also has these glittering and bulging eyes, which again gives you the sense that this man is quite overweight. He's quite slovenly. He can't walk from place to place. He'd rather use a horse. This is a very satirized, negative view of what a monk might have been in the Canterbury Tales. The next satirization comes along with the continuation of religious figures, and that would be the friar. Now, where a monk is not working amongst the people, they're just supposed to be divinely religious towards God, a friar would be one kind of like you would have a priest or a minister today. They're supposed to be working with the people to bring them closer to God. So when he travels, he's supposed to be fixing up marriages. However, he is intimate with city dames, which means he's not following his vows of chastity. Now, he claims to have his license from the Pope to hear confessions. However, he's charging money as a penance. Again, with the vows of charity and the vows of poverty that they're supposed to be taking, you're not supposed to hear confessions and then take money as a penance. That seems to be like grift. That seems to be conning people out of their money. But of course, he wants that money because if he's being intimate with the city dames, he also wants to give gifts to the women that he finds attractive in order to attract them to him. He knew taverns and barmaids well. He seems to be a wanton or a lecherous person, a person who is going to be looking for the finest food, the finest wines, and the finest ladies, and he will want to use them all. It also talks about how he has a white neck, and he has a bit of a lisp, which kind of tells you that if he is quite pale, he's not exactly going to be what the Canterbury Tales would consider hearty. Somebody who works hard and is out in the sun working all day, he's not that. At the same time, he's not a frail figure. He would butt down doors with his head because he thinks that he needs to be where he wants to be, so he takes charge. Now, because he's also taking money as penances, he's also begging money even from the poorest, whom he's supposed to be helping, and he even charges money on settling days. So the friar seems to be quite content with trying to get as much money and gathering as much money as he can. This would be a satirization, a very strong one. This is the complete opposite of what a friar should have been in the days of the Canterbury Tales. Our next character in the Canterbury Tales is the merchant. Now, he has what they call a forking beard. So it's very, very strong beard that would definitely point out his features first. Now, he dabbles in exchanges. He gives many opinions. It seems to be a type of a merchant that you would be seeing most days because he's working with the people. He's going to want to exchange money, to exchange in hands, or maybe perhaps products exchange in hands. He seems stately. He seems like he's a character who you could trust. However, he is satirized. He's very much in debt, but nobody knows it from the way he talks. Now, this satire is not as strong as it was for our previous characters. We can tell that the monk, the friar, and the prioress, the nun, are not supposed to represent what real nuns, monks, and friars were supposed to be like back in those days. So even though the merchant is satirized here, it's not as strong as before. So it seems odd that the satire is so light for the middle class and the nobility, yet it was so harsh against the religious. That might tell you something about the author and how he felt about religion in the Canterbury Tales. Back to the religion. Now we're looking at an Oxford cleric. Oxford is there's several colleges nowadays, but Oxford University is just outside of London, and an Oxford cleric would be a student at that university. He has this classic look of what a student might have had back in those days, a very hollow look and threadbare clothing. Somebody who doesn't have a lot of money because every bit is going towards just living at the university and into his tuition. And he has quite a hollow look because, again, he's spending all his time indoors studying. Now, he could not find a job in the church, but he considered himself to be too unworldly for secular employment. He didn't want to go out and get a quote-unquote real job. He would rather be in the church where he could study and be a perpetual student of God. Because he constantly needs money in order for his upkeep as a student, he borrows money from friends, but he never seems to repay them. So he'd be considered book smart. He's quite an academic. However, he doesn't have street smarts. He'd be considered life dumb. He couldn't go out and find himself a job in a store as a merchant. He couldn't go out and find himself a job in the fields. So this is quite satirized. Again, this is demonstrating the patronage of church positions, which were often bought and sold. If this Oxford cleric had enough money to pay for a good position in the church, he would have gotten one, but he doesn't. So he kind of hangs out as best as he can near these people in the hopes of ingratiating himself into the church. Next, we have the sergeant at the law, and this is one of 20 traveling judges in Chaucer's day. Now, the sergeant at the law is an experienced lawyer, and he's expert, in particular this one is, on real estate law. So all was fee simple to his strong digestion, which tells you again, if you pay a proper fee to the sergeant at the law might come down on your side. He also might find loopholes in certain laws to deprive heirs of their land, depending on who paid him more. If you wanted your neighbor's land and you're able to pay a good enough fee, he might be able to deprive heirs of their land, so it becomes like cheap land for you to buy. He is definitely satirized. Again, we're looking at Chaucer not really liking lawyers, not really thinking that they're the most honest types. Now, that is a classic satirization that we have even today for lawyers. However, this particular sergeant at the law could argue cases either way with impunity. He's a very smart man. He knows his job. And so he's not as harshly satirized as, say, perhaps the religious are in here. At the same time, he's very cliche as what you consider a lawyer or somebody who works with the law is. So we're going to consider him to be a satirization. The next character we have is the Franklin, which is a wealthy landowner. Now, Franklin lives for pleasure, particularly the Epicurean delights. That means he enjoys his food. He had a table prepared all day long, so anytime he felt like eating, there was food to be had. Now, again, this is all you really have for satirization, where you have a wealthy landowner who can just sit down and eat all day. He doesn't have to go out and work. He doesn't have to worry about where his next meal is coming from. So this is considered satirization, but it's a very light satire compared to others, compared to the sergeant at the law, and very much considering the Oxford cleric and the nun, the prioress, and the monk, the friar. This is a lighter satirization for the wealthy. Our next characters are the haberdasher, the dyer, the carpenter, the weaver, and the carpet maker. Now, you could treat all of these characters as a single character. The key to understanding these men is to look at their wives. First of all, these gentlemen look awesome. They have new looking gear, which was bought used, but that's because also as well, they know how to create. They know how to make things out of other things. Like a haberdasher is a guy who is working with clothing. A dyer is somebody who's working with fabrics. The weaver is working with fabrics. The carpet maker is working with fabrics. All of these people are working with something that would help their appearance. Their own particular wives, quote, declared it was their due, whether the men believed it or not. So they are working hard for themselves, but they're working even harder to help their wives. Their wives are kind of materialistic. The wives wanted to be called Madame and to be seen. They treat themselves as royalty. They treat themselves as the middle-class queens of their particular village or of their particular street. Now, all of these characters are definitely satirized. This is not what the working class would have actually been like in the Canterbury Tales, but it kind of seems like we have Chaucer saying you know a type of person like this who has done well for themselves and get kind of materialistic. They dig themselves in deeper and deeper in order to show off their wealth to everyone else when it's not necessary. Our next character is the cook. Now, your cook could distinguish London ale by flavor, which was quite cheap. It's kind of like being able to distinguish a secondary soda, not a cola and not Coca-Cola or Pepsi, from a different type of a generic cola. Now, he had an ulcer on his knee, probably from cooking at an open pot. Now, this particular cook makes a good thick soup. He also makes good blancmange, which is a yellow-white, thick, creamy chicken soup. The color of that ulcer, probably. Now, the cook is also satirized. When we talk about how he's supposed to be very gourmet, he considers himself to be quite the excellent cook. The only thing it talks about him making is soup. Not to say that soup can't be gourmet, but he basically throws a bunch of stuff into a very thick soup or a very thick broth that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference what is in that particular broth, what particular tastes they have. And it talks about how he's got this oozing ulcer that is the same color of his soup that perhaps he keeps burning while he cooks. Our next character in the Canterbury Tales is the skipper. Now, he rides a farmer's horse well. That's an insult. Remember, a skipper is supposed to be a captain of a seagoing vessel, a captain of some sort of ship. So when you have a captain who says he rides a farmer's horse well, that's insulting. He should be on a ship at all times. His skin was also tanned, which is a mark of lower class, because if your skin is quite tan, you're out working hard in the sun all day. If you're a captain of a ship, if you're a skipper, you would be wealthy enough to not only have clothing to protect your skin, but you should be inside the boat dock of a ship. Now, he also seems to be not exactly the most trustworthy. He steals wine while the trader slept, and he ignores his own conscience that tells him that what he does is wrong. Now, the prisoners that he does take on his ship, he makes his prisoners walk home. He seems to not be that very honorable ship's captain. He seems to not really be a person who is on a ship much if he rides a farmer's horse well. So this is quite satirized. This is not a character that you could trust as somebody who might be a good skipper from the time. Our next middle class to wealthy class character is the doctor. Now, he's grounded in astronomy as most doctors in the Middle Ages were. They look to the stars for their answers. They think that there's sort of humors and biles that kind of control what happens in a person's body. And when he talks about actually handing out medicines, it talks about all his apothecaries that are in a tribe and that each made money from the other's guile. So the doctor is working along with an apothecary or maybe perhaps other doctors in order to hand off treatments that really are not going to work, but they do gather money for them. Now, it does say he did not read the Bible, and he kept the gold he won in pestilences. Now, a pestilence is going to be a disease that spreads, particularly also could lead to famine and other major problems and quandaries for communities. So it doesn't seem like he knows his job very well. So that's why we would consider this doctor to be another satirization. The next character from the Canterbury Tales we look at is the wife of Bath, also known as the woman from Bath. Now, she wears tight red clothing, which at the time, tight clothing would not be the normal for a woman. And what also would not be normal is that she had 5 husbands, all at the church door. So it kind of seems like this particular woman doesn't keep husbands very long. It also talks about how she has gap teeth, large hips, and heels spurred, which would be Chaucer's way of saying she's not exactly attractive. But it also talks about how the wife of Bath knew the remedies for love's mischances. And she has a unique interpretation of scriptures which gave her control in her marriages. So she's quite a smart woman. She knows how to talk her way into marriages. She doesn't have the beauty, but boy, does she have the charm in order to make the men think she would be a good match. And then once she has them, they seem to not live long afterwards. I mean, she's had 5 husbands, all at the church door. This would again be a satirization of an untrustworthy, a distrustful woman who is basically marrying men in order to get estates, in order to get money. This is her way of making money. Our next particular story member in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is the parson. Now, the parson is somebody who would actually be a local community priest or minister, somebody who actually is a part of a particular church. The parson is holy-minded. He is poor, learned, devout, and patient. That sounds quite familiar to what you would consider a priest or a minister or a parson to be. And so we're going to consider him to be quite noble. Now, he calls himself a shepherd, which again, in scripture, we consider that to be someone who is a leader of a flock of people. And so he's very virtuous, rich in holy thought. It seems like this particular religious character actually will follow religious doctrine. He serves the poor. He takes on his vow of charity. He gives his own money. He takes on a vow of poverty. This parson actually practices what he preaches. For the first time in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, you have a religious figure who is not satirized. The parson actually shows what a parson should be. Our next character we have would be a lower class workman called the Plowman. Now, the Plowman follows the gospel. He steadily goes about his work. He's an honest worker and is described as being good and true. He always pays his tithes in full when due to the church, and he helps the poor because that's what you should do. He does it out of pure charity and love. He also rides a mare, and so he has a particular workhorse that he works with, and if he's not at work, he's going to use a different horse. This seems to be another character who is not satirized. This would be a more honest, truthful character as to what you would consider a working class plowman at the time of the Canterbury Tales to be. This one you can trust. Our next character in Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales is the miller. Now the miller is a stout fellow and boasted he could heave any door off the hinge or even break it with his head, so strength comes along with the miller. He weighs 224 pounds, he has a red beard, he has a wart on the end of his nose, so he's quite a striking figure. He is somebody who you would notice coming down the street very easily. And if you don't notice him by his physical appearance, perhaps you would by his character. He tells filthy tavern stories. He'll play the bagpipes. He will steal things, particularly you talk about how he steals grain with his thumb of gold. And so when he leads a procession down the street as he plays the bagpipes, he attracts a certain section of the community, and it's not the most loyal and trustful type. This is a satirized character. This is the type of character that you would find making boasts, kind of getting into violent escapades in villages and towns. So he's not the type of character that you want on his bad side. He is heavily satirized, not the type of character you want to trust. Our next character is the Manciple. Now, a Manciple is a buyer of food for the 30 Knights of the Temple, or the lawyers. And he usually gets to the market early in order to get the best values because he needs to get there early in order to choose the food because he's quite illiterate. However, even though he's not very book smart, he's street smart. He's very wise in practical matters. And so your Manciple, who is working with the market and trying to buy things, he lives debt-free on what he has saved. So he sounds like a nice guy to know. He's the type of character who kind of collects up all of these pennies and is able to save up enough in order for him to have the finer things in life as well. But this would be considered a satirization because he's just so concentrated on money. He's so concentrated on always getting the best deal. Our next consideration for a character is the reeve. Now, a reeve supervises the serfs. You have people who are sent off by a prince, by a duke, by somebody who owns all of the lands in order to check on the poor farmers who are working the lands. That is the reeve. The reeve has what they describe as calfless legs. That means his legs are just twigs. He is very, very skinny. He knows the serfs' dodges, so they feared him. No one ever catches him in arrears, so he is quite smart. He is quite crafty, maybe even perhaps very sly. He's better at bargains than his lord. And so when you talk about the reeve, he is the type of a guy who, he's not exactly conning you, but he's going to make sure he gets his and then some of yours as well. Now, he does have a profession. He is a carpenter. However, being as thin and as cunning as he is hated very much by the miller, the man who's very boastful. Remember the man who tells the tavern stories and plays the bagpipes? He's very brash and outspoken. The reeve is the opposite of that, and so they do not get along. And so is where you would find the miller in the front of the procession. You'd probably find the reeve at the back of the procession. And like the miller, the reeve is also very heavily satirized. This is not what they would be in truth, but this particular character is what they would have thought a reeve was back in the day. Our next satirization would be the summoner. Now, the summoner should be somebody who brings out other people and who talks about favors. His face is described as being like a cherub, like an angel, and yet his features don't quite match that. It talks about how he's got carbuncles and pimples on his face, how his face has black scabby brows, how he has a thin beard. He is not very attractive at all. In fact, he frightens the children. If that's not enough to frighten you away, mostly what he was eating was garlic, onions, and leeks, so his breath is going to frighten you away. And because he's not a very friendly type person, he's just going to drink his pain away. He drank wine till all was hazy. And he takes bribes, a quart of wine or even favors from women, and perhaps you won't be summoned. And of course, because of that, he's threatened with excommunication. And once again, for somebody who's working somewhat anywhere near the church, unless you're the parson, the local priest or minister, you're going to be satirized in the Canterbury Tales. You're again going to have this negative appearance that probably is not the way he should be. Our next religious figure is the pardoner. Now, the pardoner in particular is from the Charing Cross. It talks about how he's got bulging eyeballs, how his hair is yellow and long. Again, not another attractive person. However, he's quite important. He carries pardons from Rome, or at least so he said. And you kind of wonder again at what kind of manliness for the Canterbury Tales he shows, because it talks about how he has a goat-like voice and how he could not grow a beard. So when we talk again about the pardoner, we have the quote, "I judge he was a gelding or a mare." Again, we don't have this very manly, distinctive type character. As a matter of fact, it even talks about how he wears a pillowcase. Now, he's not wearing a pillowcase, it's just a veil. But again, not a very masculine thing. He also has a goblet of Peter's sail, which tells us he believes he has a relic upon him, which again, somebody with that great authority from the church who comes directly from Rome should have. He sings the offertory well, because again, he would like some offerings, he would like some money. And he always has worked. So he's always going from place to place, trying to be the pardoner from Rome. And again, he's quite satirized. It's the type of character that you'd kind of wonder how much authority does he really have from Rome. Our next character in the Canterbury Tales is the host. Now, the host, of course, would serve the finest victuals and basically has a wide girth. Not only are they serving fine foods, they're probably tasting them as well. He suggests a tale-telling contest, and the prize would be a very gourmet meal for the winner that is being paid by the others at the particular hosting. So everyone who is staying at the inn are going to be the tale-tellers, and a return trip would mean another round of meals and lodging. And so that is how the host is going to make out here. He's going to get more money from people on the return trip. Now, he says he would be the sole judge of the tales, and he is going to accompany the pilgrims to Canterbury. Now, this particular host is being satirized. He's a middle-class worker. He is actually doing what he's supposed to be doing, trying to get people to stay at his lodgings, trying to get them to eat his fine meals. But here he in himself is enjoying his own food and lodging and working hard to make sure the people who've stayed at his inn are coming back. Now, when we look at the nature of the Canterbury Tales themselves, these tales that these men are going to tell at the inn are very commonly told stories that are interactive with the others' tales. For example, the friar is going to tell a tale to insult the monk is going to tell a tale that insults the friar, the reeve is going to tell a tale to insult the miller, and so on. So as they tell tales, it's really almost like tattletaling on the guy you don't like. Thank you so much for stopping by to learn about the characters of the Canterbury Tales. If you'd like me to actually go through the context of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, leave a comment down below. Let me know if you'd like to hear any particular stories or if you'd like to hear about all of them. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by.